Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the International Criminal Court opens a new war crimes probe into Sudan's civil war as the UN accuses RSF paramilitary forces in Darfur of killing and dumping the bodies of at least 87 people. Also, South Sudan's top court upholds an earlier ruling that former South African President Jacob Zuma should return to prison to finish off a 15-month sentence for contempt, of course. That is, of course, in South Africa. And the power of the podcast is on the rise across the continent. The multi-billion-dollar sector has been largely dominated by voices from outside of Africa, but more producers from the continent are taking to the mic to tell their stories. But first, the International Criminal Court's investigating allegations of war crimes committed during Sudan's deepening conflict. The brutality of the fighting between two warring generals has only intensified since it broke out in mid-April. Over 3,000 people have been killed, and the ICC says that many possible atrocities have been reported since. On Thursday, the UN's Human Rights Office accused the RSF paramilitary of killing and dumping the bodies of dozens of people. The mass grave was discovered outside of the West Darfur city of El Janina. Camille Nedlek has more.
A grim discovery in West Darfur. The UN reported that dozens of people from the Masalit ethnic group, including women and children, were buried in a mass grave last month, citing credible information that implicates Sudan's rapid support forces.
Witnesses said that local mediation efforts for access to the burial of the dead have generally taken long, leaving many bodies lying on the streets for days on end. One family told us it had to wait 13 days before being allowed to collect the body of a family member, a Masalit dignitary.
RSF officials deny involvement. Fighting broke out in April between the country's military leadership and the rival RSF forces. Thousands have been killed and over 3 million people have fled the city as the two factions vie to break their stalemate. Some 10 ceasefires have been brokered and broken since the start of the conflict. Kenya's William Ruto spearheaded an attempt on Monday to bring the warring sides once again to the negotiating table. But Sudan's military refused to take part, accusing Ruto of ties to the RSF. On Thursday, neighbouring nations gathered in Cairo, announcing that their foreign ministers would work together to develop a peace plan.
We urge the warring parties to stop the escalation, commit to immediate and sustainable ceasefire, end the war, and prevent the bloodshed of innocent Sudanese people.
The UN has warned that Sudan is on the verge of all-out civil war that is increasingly divided across ethnic and tribal lines.
South Africa's top court has upheld a ruling that former President Jacob Zuma should return to prison to finish a 15-month sentence handed down for contempt of court in 2021. The 81-year-old was released earlier on medical parole after his jailing sparked widespread protests in which at least 337 people were killed. The South African Prison Service had granted Zuma's conditional release. That was later found to be illegal. And on Thursday, the Constitutional Court upheld that earlier decision, ruling that the prison services could not appeal. Love him or hate him, the prospect of Zuma's return to jail could have big repercussions across the country. MC Ferreira has more.
Right now, we can't predict how events are going to unfold following this decision by the Constitutional Court. In fact, we don't even know where Jacob Zuma is. He's believed to be in Zimbabwe, but when I asked his spokesman to confirm that, he said he couldn't disclose his whereabouts for security reasons. What is clear is that the highest court in the land has spoken and that its decision is final. Now, it's addressed itself to the Commissioner of Prison Services. His office said earlier that he's taking legal advice as to the way forward, and it's understood that there will be a meeting possibly on Thursday evening still, including the Minister of Justice, to discuss what to do next. But officials privately say that the inescapable interpretation is that Zuma must return to prison. They can ask him to hand himself over willingly. We know from past experience that that is unlikely to happen, and in that case they have to arrest him. Now, it's again not clear what happens once he's back in prison. The High Court said that time spent on parole that was unlawfully granted cannot count as time served. But here the Supreme Court of Appeal took a different position, and it said that should be left to the discretion of the commissioner. So there's that option, but there's also another, in that Zuma can go back to prison, spend a few weeks there, and then he can apply for ordinary parole, which he would have been eligible to do at the 3-month mark. And of those 3 months, he's already spent 2 behind bars.
MC Fahera talking us through there. Now, Burkina Faso authorities say that more than 500 people have been expelled from Ghana. The UNHCR accuses Accra of deporting refugees fleeing violence at home. Extremist violence has ravaged Burkina Faso, and more than 2 million people have been displaced internally over the last few years. Ghana's rejected that accusation that it's expelling Burkinabés, but says that those returning are being repatriated. Iran's president arrived in Zimbabwe's capital on Thursday on the last leg of his trip to the continent. The visit's part of Iran's bid to beef up new partnerships in a bid to take the edge off US sanctions. Prior to Zimbabwe, Ebrahim Raisi had been to Kenya and Uganda. Clément de Roma tells us more.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, after meeting his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni this Wednesday, expressed support for Uganda's controversial anti-LGBT+ law, which has received criticism from Western partners, including the United States. He claimed that the West wants to put an end to the human species by promoting homosexuality. Raisi also pledged support for Uganda's oil projects, particularly for the construction of a refinery linked to the East African pipeline, partly funded by TotalEnergies. He dismissed concerns from environmental activists about potential ecological threats posed by Uganda's oil ambitions. Additionally, Iran has aided Uganda in establishing a hydroelectric power station and 3 hospitals in the past years. Both countries said that they are now exploring ways to enhance their commercial exchanges while navigating international sanctions on Iran, an isolated country that relies partly on Africa to buy agricultural goods. Raisi's next and final destination on the continent is Zimbabwe, where we'll also meet with his counterpart.
Clément de Roma there for us. Now, people in the Republic of Congo are growing increasingly frustrated by the rising cost of petrol. They've already seen a hike this year, and another is just around the corner. The extra financial pressure means that many fear that they won't be able to take public transport as far as they need. Our team reports.
In the Republic of Congo, petrol prices rose by 5% in January. Just a few months later, a new petrol price hike is not going down well. A litre at the pump once cost 625 CFA francs, or about 95 euro cents, but that will rise to 775 CFA francs, or about 1.2 euros, on July 15th.
We don't understand. If petrol keeps going up, it will be difficult for people to get around. The only profitable thing is to do half journeys. That's what I'll do.
Half journeys. This means that Congolese people taking public transport will have to get off halfway and travel the rest of the way on foot to save money.
I'd like to go into town, but I'm having trouble taking the bus. The price of petrol is skyrocketing and people are having trouble getting by. It's taking its toll on everyday life. We're afraid because if fuel prices increase, will our wages increase? There shouldn't be a disparity between what we get and what we spend.
The government says it raised prices at the request of the IMF. Officials claim things could have been worse, as the international lender had even recommended a 65% price increase.
Attacking one of the few things with which the Congolese could show a little satisfaction with the state brings us down a little further. It doesn't send the right signal, so that those responsible for the mismanagement recognize that they are responsible for a situation that is going from bad to worse.
Congo is a major oil producer, and the IMF has urged it to stop subsidizing petrol and allocate money towards other priority sectors, such as education and health, instead. The Congolese government says it's tried to soften the blow of the price hikes with the abolition of some taxes and customs duties.
Well, the power of the podcast is on the rise in Africa. Globally, the market for the medium is valued at around 13 billion euros. But so far, that's largely been dominated by Europeans and Americans. Many Africans, though, say that the limited space for the telling of their stories from their continent is a challenge that shrouds many of the positive things happening. In Ghana's capital, a new wave of podcasters are producing programs to fill that gap. Our correspondents report.
Once every week, Isaac Aboa and Daniel Murky set up to record their podcast series, Change Africa. Each episode is roughly an hour and a half and showcases African thought leaders breaking new ground in their field of work.
Instead of writing books, instead of putting these ideas into complicated formats, they sit with us for 1 hour and they pour out everything that they have taught about for the past 20 years, all the work they've been doing so that it can be easily consumed, not just people on the continent, but the African diaspora and everybody who cares about Africa's development.
Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Today, Isaac is interviewing Paul Nelson. Paul is the founder of the Decan Center, Africa's first photography library in Accra, Ghana's capital. Podcasts like Change Africa is part of a plethora that is breaking through the internet space.
We need more platform, we need more ideas, we need more systems, that people could be able to share their stories. And I'm very a strong believer on platforms and distribution outlets, that amplifies African content and African stories. So
why don't I just post it online?
With the high cost of internet, low connection, and little or sometimes no advertising money at all, many who started podcasting in parts of the continent have struggled and even failed to break through.
After you define what news is, what comes after that?
Theorose Gineku teaches new media studies at the Ghana Institute of Journalism.
I gradually guide them through the production, and at the end of the course, really, I have students coming to tell me that, we love it, we have an idea, we've started our own podcast, but overall, if they have literacy skills, they are able to learn it, and that's the point, the learning, the willingness to learn it.
This podcast, now in its third year, has audience in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Ghana, from where it is produced.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care.
Hello, I'm Annette Young. And in this special edition, we're focusing on the upcoming Women's Football World Cup. It's been 4 years since France hosted this event, but since then it appears the women's game has not gained as much ground as it should have done. This as other nations are zooming ahead and scoring goals in more ways than one.
You can't expect to have the same salary, but you can expect to have the same stadium, the same training ground, because your body is exactly doing the same things as the men. So I think we need the same support.
The 51%, presented by Annette Young on France 24 and France24.com.